Let's begin. Good morning. Today's daf is Samich Beis. Today's daf is Samich Beis. We're going to start Samich Aleph Amud Beis. So we actually have a lot to do today. We left off 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 15. 15 lines up from the bottom. A lot to do. Tan Rabbanan. The Lakach Nidama Asham. So also remember the pasuk says over here, the pasuk says Vayikach. I'm sorry. V'lakach midama asham, excuse me. So the pasuk says, "V'lakach hakoin midama asham, v'nasan hakoin al tunuch ozen hamitahera yimanis, v'al bohen yado hayimanis, v'al bon ragla yimanis." See here, the Torah is referring once again to the offering of the mitzorah. So the Torah says the following: "V'lakach midama asham, yachol b'kli." Remember again, we spoke about the mitzorah applications yesterday on his earlobe, and then afterwards, ultimately on his big toe as well. So the Gemara says the following. Yochel, you might have thought, Yochel B'kli, you might have thought that you're supposed to receive the blood in a utensil. Talmud Lomar V'Nasan, but the pasuk says the kohen will apply it. Man esina ba'atzmo shel kohen, just like the actual application is done with the hands of the kohen. Aflikicha ba'atzmo shel kohen. So too, Rabbi will say what the actual receiving of the blood is done with the hands of the kohen. So also what the Gemara seems to be suggesting over here is that for the mitzorah, the kohen will actually go ahead and receive the dam, not in a kli, but rather in his hand. Yochel aflim mizbeach kain. I might have thought that this is true even for the blood that is going to be applied on the mizbeach. Talmud lomar ki kechatos ha'asham. Machat. So therefore, the Torah says kechatos ha'asham. That ultimately, again, that the kechatos ha'asham, that the asham is treated like the chatos. What does that mean? Machatos to unakli. Just as the chatas requires a kli sharis, af asham ta'un kli. So to the asham requires a kli. So Rabbi says, so which one is it? Is the kohen receiving the blood in his hands, or is he receiving it in a kli? To which the Gemara says both. Nim says ata omer asham mitzorah shnei kohanim mekabim estamo. Therefore, it turns out Rabbi said that the asham for the mitzorah, 2 kohanim have to be involved in receiving the blood. Echad biyad, one receives it in his hand. The echad bekli, one receives it in a utensil. The kohen who received the blood in his hand, in the kli, ultimately takes that blood for sprinkling purposes on the mizbeach. And the kohen who received the blood in his hands, he takes it to the mitzorah to do the blood applications on the earlobe and on the big toe of the mitzorah. Tanan Hassam, we learned there. The chulan mitamin begadim v'nisrafen abeis hadesh and divi Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Shimon. So once you listen to this, so now go back, look at Rashi for just a moment. The kulam mitamin begadim, Rashi says, kol aparim v'haseirim hashenuyim b'mishnasenu kabinish pachadon. So also now we're going back to the case that we spoke about yesterday, or as we see for the last couple of days, which is the situation of where I'm offering, the Kohen Gadol is offering the blood on Yom Kippur, and what happens? The blood spills. So what happens in the event that the blood spills? You have to go ahead and shecht another animal. So now the Gemara says the following. Look at Rashi. So all the cows and all of the goats that are offered in our Mishnah, Gabi nishbach adam la'achar kapara zu vehevi parsheni leparochas v'gamar matanos haparochas v'nishbach adam vehevi shlishi lematanos hamizbeach kulan nisrafin chutz l'shalosh machanos abeis hadeshen or metamin begadim ha'asukin b'sreifas. So listen to this. So the halacha is, let's say in a normal case, so you have one par and 2 seirim. But remember again, only one of those seirim is being offered up in the Beis HaMikdash. The other one will go la'azazel, which we'll speak about next parak. So the idea is, after you go ahead and you shech the animal, so remember, these are not typical karbanos. So you go ahead and actually you burn the carcasses of the animal in a place outside of the Beis HaMikdash. So not what the Gemara is quoting over here is actually quoting the Mishnah that says that let's say you have to shecht numerous animals because let's say the blood keeps on spilling. So every carcass of every animal that you have to shecht for the purpose of the blood service is essentially treated the same. Namely, it's taken out and it's burned in what's called the Beis Hadeshen. That's number one. And number two, it is mitame the clothing of the person who transports it. So again, I will say the novelty over here is that as many animals as you need to go ahead and complete the blood service, those animals are all treated in a sacrificial way the same way. That's the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Shimon. The Chachamim say, "Ein mitamin begadim ve'ein nisrafin habeis hadeshen ela ha'acharon." And the Chachamim Rabbosai say what? No, not true. The only animal carcass that has to be taken out to the Beis Hadeshen, and the only carcass that is mitame those who transport it is which one? Is the last one. Why, Rabbosai? Remember, this goes back to the machlokes yesterday. Because what's the fundamental machlokes? Remember, in the event that the blood spills, so what do the Chachamim say? You have to start. You have to start all over again, right? What do Rebbe Lazar and Rebbe Shimon say? You pick up from where you left off. So, now this makes sense. So, according to Rebbe Lazar and Rebbe Shimon, who say you pick up from where you left off, every single animal is vested with sanctity because every single animal has done something in the blood service. According to the Chachamim, no. It's only the last one that does the entire complete blood service that is sacrificially significant, but the rest are not. Therefore, the only one you have to take out to the Beis Hadeshen to burn, the only one that transmits tumah is the last animal, because that is the animal that's used for the full blood service. So we'll say, now here's the interesting question. So remember again, let's go to the case of the goats for just a moment. So remember again, if you have blood, let's play this out. So they have the two goats. One is going la Azazel, one is going la Hashem, and you're about to sprinkle the blood la Hashem. I'm sorry. So now what happens? The blood spills. So Moshe is saying, good. Remember, in order to go ahead and get a new seir la Hashem, you can't just pick out a new seir la Hashem. What do you have to do? You have to do a new gorel. You have to do a new lottery. So if you look at Rashi says over here, he says, "V'chamasir mishalech im nishbachta masayir la'achar shegaram matanos pnim v'hotzrach lahavi shnayim ulahagriel aleihem." Oh, you have to do a whole nother gorel. Now this poses a whole nother issue, which is what? So now let's play this out. What do you do? So potentially now you have multiple goats la'azazel, right? Because remember, this whole time we've only been focusing on what you're doing with the goat La Hashem. The whole goat La Azazel is ready to go out. We'll discuss exactly where it's going to go, but it goes out somewhere to the wilderness. So now, if you spill the dam La Hashem and you have to do another goat, that means now you have two Seirim La Azazel. If you spill it, if you have a clumsy Kohen Gadol, you spill it repeated times, you could have mamish a whole herd of Azazel goats.
You have the other one too. It's got to be similar, right? The two goats have to be even. You wouldn't be clumsy. Not only one to Azazel, the other one needs to be similar to the one. So if you have another goat that you're replacing the Azazel one with, once you need another.
What do you mean? I mean, you always have to do the lottery again.
Right, but you need another goat for the other side also.
That's the main one.
You need another goat
Not
for
two,
this.
two goats. You need two.
Correct. That is correct. So the Gemara says, so what do you do? So the Gemara, how many goats do you send out Azazel? What do you think? You send out the whole herd? Now we'll say obviously that's kind of like what he's saying is obviously you can't send them all out, and Rashi points out the Torah itself talks about the idea that there's one seir la Azazel, top of Samach Beis. So the Gemara says, well, you want to say that but yet here's what's interesting. So Rava responds to this, and Rava says to Rav Nachman, you want to say we can't send out a whole herd, but yet we burn a whole herd. And I will say what that means is, according to the opinion of Rebbe Lazar Reb Shimon, remember that you are taking out, if let's say again, you keep on shechting the Sir La Hashem, or you keep on shechting different paros, so then remember, what ends up happening is, you end up taking out multiple animal carcasses to the Beis Hadeshen to be burned. So what Rava's response, Rav Nachman says, you can't send out more than one Sir La Azazel, because there's only one Sir that's supposed to be sent. Rava responds, that's true, but there's also only supposed to be one seir and one par that's taken out to the Beis Hadeshen to be burnt. And yet, what did we just establish? At least according to Rebbe Shimon, that's not necessarily the case. To which the Gemara says, no. Hasam lo ksiv oso, hacham ksacha ksiv oso. Here's the difference, Rabbi say, that by the seir la Azazel, the Torah says l'shalach oso la Azazel. The Torah says you shall send it. So the Torah itself clearly indicates that what? There is only one seir that is sent la Azazel. The Torah, however, does not give that limitation by what? By the par and by the seir that ultimately have to be burnt by the Beis Hadeshen. So there is an exclusionary word by seir la Azazel that is not there by the par and the seir. But I will say, obviously the question remains, which is what? Which is, which goat are you sending out la Azazel? Right. So the Gemara is not going to deal with that right now, because actually that's going to be the topic of the next parak. But here's what we've established, at least according to The Chachamim will hold that. So the Chachamim will say. So there are two things that Chachamim hold. Number one, which is actually how the Rambam paskins, that we pass like the Chacham in general, that if the blood spilled, you have to start the whole blood service over. So that's how we paskin. We don't pass like Rebbe Elazar, Rebbe Shimon that you pick up from the middle. We passing you have to do the whole thing again. So that leads into beautifully this second part as well, which is that's why the only animal that you'll have to take out to the base hadeshin to be burned is which animal? The last one, because that's the one that was actively used for the blood service, and that's the one that will be matame begadim as well. It's also clear that at the end of the day, everyone agrees that you're only sending out one seir la'azazel, even if you have multiple seirim. Now, which one you send and what you do with the other ones, we'll actually see in the next paragraph.
You start over completely, or just start over that unit?
Just the unit that you're. That's what we saw in the previous mission. Just the unit that you're in. Correct. So let's say if you're doing on the parochas, you don't have to go back into the Kodesh HaKadosh. We just begin from the beginning of the parochas. Itmar Rav Papi Mishmei de Rava Amar Rishon Mishaleach Rav Simi Mishmei de Rava Amar Achra Mishaleach. So now they actually discuss which goat we should send. Okay, so now we've established we're only going to send one Sila Azazel. Who gets to go? The goats aren't lining up, by the way. Right? Who gets to go? So Rav Papi says the name of Rava. We send the first one. Right, meaning we keep the first seir la'azazos from the first unit. That's the one that sent la'azazos. Rav Simi Mishnei de Rava says no. We send the acharon. We send the last one. Bishlama Rav Simi bar Ashi Mishnei de Rava damar achra mishaleach. So it makes sense according to Rav Simi, who says that we send the last one. Why? So kasaver hoil v'gomer bo kapara. So we'll say to send the last seir la'azazos makes sense. Why? Because that last seir is related to what? Is related to the seir LaHashem that was used to complete the blood service, right? And we'll say that's true whether you like the Chachamim or like Rebbe Elazar or Shimon. Meaning at the end of the day, the last seir LaHashem that was brought is the one that either according to Chachamim you did the entire blood service with, or according to Rebbe Elazar or Shimon you finished off the blood service with. So it makes sense that you're going to use the last. So just like you use the last seir LaHashem to finish out the kapara, you'll use the last seir la'azazel for kapara as well. Elarat papi mishmei de Rava. My kasover. But according to Rav Papi, the name of Rava, what does he hold? Why does he hold that you use the first seir la'azazel? So both this is very interesting. So he says, several like Rabbi Yossi, dar mitzvah rishon. He holds like Rabbi Yossi. And Rabbi Yossi generally holds the concept that you do the mitzvah, any particular mitzvah, should be done with the first item designated for the mitzvah. Okay, so Rabbi Yossi is a subscriber to the idea first. So the first Sir Lazazel that you have, the first year you have Sir Lazazel, you should use the first. Don't pass over the first. This maybe perhaps is a derivative of the concept of Ein Ma'avir and Ala Mitzvos, that an opportunity that comes your mitzvah bali adekal tachmitzena. So whatever was designated as the first, that's what you should use. So the Gemara says, hey Rabbi Yossi, which position of Rabbi Yossi are you referring to? Ilim Rabbi Yossi de Kupos. If you want to say it's Rabbi Yossi of Kupos, you also see now the Gemara is going to quote the Mishnah from Shkalim. So it's actually good chazara. So what do we learn in Shkalim? This is not Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says, Shalosh Kupos, Shalosh Sein, Shebahen Terminus Halish Krabosai. There were 3 collection boxes that held the half shekels. And each of them were able to contain a volume of 3 saw. Look at Rashi. Es Halishka, Sheshlichu L'socha Shkalim, Sheviu Ba'adar, Umemalin Hagizbarim Mehen Shalosh Kupos L'Truma, Liknos Mehen Karbonos Tzibor Timidim Musafir. I will say, this is not the actual collection boxes that people deposited money into. This was after the money was removed from the shofros. They were placed in these boxes, these larger boxes, and money was withdrawn from these boxes to purchase communal offerings. And what happens? Vayukasav Aleim, Aleph Beis Gimel. And they wrote on these boxes, Aleph Beis Gimel. Remember again, I will say, in the Mishnah Masechah Shkalim, we saw that according to some, they used alpha, beta, gamma. Either way, they labeled these particular boxes. The Tanya, Rabbi Yossi, Lama Kasal Aleph Beis Gimel, and Rabbi Yossi says, why do you have to label the boxes? So the Gemara says, Leida Eza Mehen Nitrama Rishon, Lahavi Hemena Rishon, Shemitzvah Barishon. And Rabbi Yossi says, why? Because Rabbi Yossi, remember, you can't withdraw all the money simultaneously. Remember, so money was deposited in the shofros by the people, and then the money was taken from the shofros and transported into these larger boxes. So what would happen is they'd fill up the aleph box first, they'd fill up the Beis box second and the Gimel box third. Rabbi Yossi says we label the boxes to know what? To know which one was filled up in which order, and in order to tell us, therefore, that when withdrawing money for the sake of purchasing Karbanos Sibor, we should take money from the Aleph box first. Why? Why? Mitzvah Berishon. Because what do you see from here? That it is a mitzvah it is important to perform the mitzvah with the first item you had at your mitzvah disposal. Therefore, again, the Gemara is going to suggest that Lamaisa, again, this is why Rav Papi says that the first Seir La'azazel is the one ultimately that is sent out. So the Gemara says, well, that's not a good raya. Dilma be'idna dis chazoi kamaisa, lois chazoi basraisa. Both said that's not necessarily true. Why? Because maybe at the time when you removed the money from the first box, there was not yet money in the second box. Look at Rashi. Be'idna dis chazoi kupa kamaisa lahakriv mimenu. Lois chazai basraisa sharishona niras lahakrava mishenitrama aval seir shel zug rishon lo nira lishloach at shegamru kamatron. So we're supposed to listen to this. Someone says maybe the shkalim case is not a good case. Why? Because understand, when the Kohanim are moving the money, let's say from the shofros to these big boxes, so they can't move. They're not moving all of the money simultaneously, which means that they're actively taking the money for Kupa Aleph before they're taking the money for Kupa Beis and Kupa Gimel. So here, what you've done is you've actively designated money for Kupa Aleph before there's even any money for Kupa Beis and Kupa Gimel. So perhaps in that kind of case, everybody would agree that what? Everybody would agree that you should use Kupa Aleph first, because Kupa Aleph literally comes into existence before the money of any of the other Kupos do. However, look at Rashi. Aval Seir Shel Zug Rishon Lo Nira Lishloach Ad Gamlu Kamatot. So we'll say, when does the Seir La'azazel really become activated? When does it really become activated? Only once the Seir LaHashem is done. Because also remember, as we will see, the Seir LaAzazel is only sent out after all the blood applications are complete. So as much as we designated the Seir LaAzazel a little bit early on, it doesn't really become activated until the blood service is complete. If that's the case, then maybe the Seir LaAzazel that should be activated is which one? Is the last one. Because it's only after the last Seir LaHashem. Again, on both sides, it doesn't matter. Either according to the Chachamim, where you're doing the entire blood service again, or according to Elazar B'Shimon, you're only picking up from where you left off. The point is, the Seir LaAzazel only becomes activated when the blood service is done. If that's the case, then just like the Seir, then therefore, it should be the last Seir LaAzazel that is the real one that is sent out. Ella Rabbi Yossi de Pesach. So rather, no. When we say that Rav Papi, who holds that you use the first Seir Mishaleach, the first Seir LaAzazel, holds like Rabbi Yossi, who holds the first. It's Rabbi Yossi of Pesach. What did Rabbi Yossi of Pesach say? This nan. Also, we have this in Pesachim as well. Hamafresh Pischom. Somebody separated, designated an animal for Karban Pesach, and what happens? Va'avad, and he lost it. And then Rabbi said the obligation to tie the Karban Pesach to your door, to your bedpost, was only a din in Pesach Mitzrayim. You don't have to do that in subsequent Pesachim. So I separated out my Karban Pesach, and what happens? It got lost. And the hifrish achar tachtov, I separate out another Karban Pesach. The achar kach nimtza rishon, and then I find the first one. I both say, when do I find the first one? When do I find it? Obviously, before I shechted the second one. Remember, the Gemara spent much time. If he's find it after shechita, what do you do with it? This is before I shechted my Karban Pesach, and this is after chatzos. Because again, Rashi points out if it's before chatzos, then neither one has the true designation of Karban Pesach. But it's after chatzos, so now what happens? V'hari shnein omdim. So now I have two Karban Pesachs in front of me, but what's the problem? You can only offer one. There's one Karban Pesach per customer. So what do I do? The truth is, you could offer either one. Whichever one you want, you could offer. Rabbi Yossi Omer, no. Mitzvah berishon. Rabbi Yossi says, no, you can't offer either one. You have to use the first one. Why? Mitzvah berishon. Because Lamaisa, again, it is always a mitzvah to use the first item you designated. However, unless of course what? Unless of course the second animal is a higher quality animal, then the choicest animal, then you should go ahead and use that particular animal. So therefore, both sides, the Gemara is suggesting that Rav Papi, who goes ahead and says that you should use the first Seir LaAzazel, is aligning himself with the view of Rabbi Yossi, and apparently Rabbi Yossi of Karban Pesach, who says that when you have two possibilities, always go with the first. I will say, we're not resolving this here, because actually, again, this is going to be the topic of the next parak about what you do in these kind of circumstances with Seir LaAzazel. Fine. Hadran aloch,
The last-
hotziolo.
Last statement is also Rabbi Yossi?
Yeah, the last name is also Rabbi Yossi, correct. Even Rabbi Yossi, who says that you should always choose the first, but if there's a clear quality difference in second animal, then go with the second. Hadran aloch, hotziolo. New parak. Shnei Sir Yom Kippurim. Mitzvah. All right, so now we're going to talk about, we did in the earlier parak, about the hagrala, about the drawing of the lottery. Now the Gemara is going to talk about the actual quality of the animals themselves. So Shnei Seirei Yom Kippurim, the two goats of Yom Kippur, the two goats, remember this is the Seir LaHashem and the Seir LaAzazel. Mitzvasan sheyihiyu shnehen shavin b'mara bekoma ubidamim. They have to look the same, mara, koma, they have to have the same height, damim, they have to have the same value. The two seirim have to be, to whatever degree possible, identical, uvelikichasan ke'echad, and they should be purchased at the same time as well. Okay, so they should be identical. Va'afapi she'in shavin ksher. But at the end of the day, if they're not identical, then what? L'maisa, the avoda is still good. So l'chatchila, we try to have them identical in every way: appearance, stature, value, and time of purchase. But if they weren't, the avoda is still good. Lakach echad hayom ve'echad l'machar ksherin. And furthermore, if you purchased one of them today and one of them tomorrow, it's still kosher. Meis echad mehem. So we'll say now, interesting case. What happens if one of them dies? Im ad shelo higril meis yikach zug l'shein. So we'll say everything depends on when the animal dies. So now again, remember, I've separated out my two sirim that are going to go ahead and be my Sir LaHashem, Sir LaAzazel. So one of them dies. If the one dies before the lottery, before the hagrala, then what do? Yikach zug l'shein. That's the easy case, because they're both saying before the lottery, neither is designated in any specific way, and therefore, what do I need to do? Just purchase another animal. That's why I need to just purchase another animal. However, but what happens if the animal died after the lottery? So I will say at this point in time, each animal has its own unique identity. So what do? Yavi zug achar. You have to bring another pair of animals. V'yagril aleihem betrila, and you have to perform another lottery. They both say these next lines of the Mishnah seem a little bit strange. So, but the Gemara is going to, since we're just going to read it now, we'll explain it later on in the Gemara. Yoma, and you should say the following: Im shel shem meis, if the Seir LaHashem died, zeh she'ala halav hagor al Hashem yiskayim tachtov, then this new animal that is chosen l'shem should be instead of it. V'im shel azazel meis, and if the animal of azazel died, zeh she'ala alav hagor la'azazel yiskayim tachtov, then this new animal should be instead of it. So the reason why this is a strange statement is because, again, the Mishnah just said the moment before that Lemaisa, if one of the animal dies, what do you have to do? You have to replace both. You're right. Remember, if you have to replace both, because remember, the whole chap is that these two animals, these two seirim, operate as a unit. They operate as a unit. And here, the Mishnah seems to be saying you're employing some kind of tanai. So the Gemara is going to discuss exactly what this means. However, this last point is important. Vasheni yira achi saistomos. Now here's the interesting case. The interesting case is, what do you do with the second animal? So also remember, I have Seir LaHashem, Seir LaAzazel. I picked them out. I did the hagrala. I did the lottery, and now the Seir LaAzazel dies. So now what do I have to do? I have to get two new animals, whole new lottery. What's the problem? The problem is I still have a Seir LaHashem from the first unit. So what do I do with that? So what the Gemara says over here, what the Mishnah says, is that that's what we call the sheni. The sheni is the leftover animal. So I take the sheni and I allow it to graze ad sheyistaiv, until it develops a mum. Because I won't say once it develops a mum, it's no longer usable for sacrificial purposes. And what do? V'yimgar, I sell it. V'yiplu damav l'nedava, and I use its money ultimately for nedava, for nedava purposes. Now, why is that? So now, here's what's interesting. The Gemara assumes that this is not what I would normally do with this carbon. What would I normally do with this carbon? Look at Rashi for just a moment. Actually, we have to read the line. She'ein chatas tzibor mesa. Because a communal sin offering is not put to death. Now, what does that mean? Look at Rashi. She'ein chatas tzibor mesa. Tichi gemiri chamish chatos biyachid gemiri. The time of Farish baharios. But tomorrow, so also listen to this. The Gemara Mesechus, we actually discussed this a little bit in passing a couple of weeks ago. There is a concept that if a person had a carbon chatos, we call chatos yochid, and I lost my carbon chatos, and so I had to go ahead and bring another carbon chatos. And then let's say I offer my first carbon chatos, I offer my second carbon chatos, and after I offer my carbon, I find my first carbon chatos. So what do I do with that first carbon chatos that was lost and now found? The halacha is you lock it in a room and it dies of starvation. Dies of starvation. Don't pull a Peter on me over here, all right? So now, the outrage. So now
on video?
Yeah, it's on video. Yes. So now.
Bleep it out.
So now what happens? So now both say why is that? Because the halacha is, and again we'll actually discuss why that is. The halacha is that when you have a carbon chatas, you have an individual who achieved kapara through another animal, the original animal is simply put to death. So I might have thought that same standard should apply over here, because essentially what happened over here, I had a chatas that was set aside for kapara, and now it turns out that I achieved kapara through another animal. So I might have thought the process, therefore, for that animal is what? Lock it in a room and it dies. Kamash on the Mishnah says no. That concept only applies to individual chatos. It does not apply to chatos hatzibor. She'ein chatos hatzibor mesa. Therefore, I will say what happens. Therefore, what do we do with it? We let it graze until it develops a mum. Once it develops a mum, I could sell it off, and I use the money to purchase carbon nedava. On the other hand, Rabbi Yehuda says no, Thomas. Rabbi Yehuda says we let it die. Apparently, Rabbi Yehuda says that a chatos tzibor, whose owners ultimately achieved kapara through another carbon, that first carbon is left to die. Okay, we'll see in the Gemara what the nature of the machlokis is. So the Gemara says, Va'od Rabbi Yehuda. Furthermore, Rabbi Yehuda said, Nishpach hadam yamos hamishtalech. Furthermore, Rabbi Yehuda says that if the blood spills, Yamos hamishtalech. Literally, the mishtaleach should be left to die. Meis hamishtalech yishbach hadam. And if the mishtaleach died, the blood should be spilled. Now look at Rashi for just a moment. Yamos hamishtalech v'yavi shnayim yagril aleim betchila. And both say what Rabbi Yehuda seems to be saying is repeating his same shita. Rabbi Yehuda says both is going back to what we learned before. So now let's say again you shechted the seir la Hashem, and the blood spilled. So what do you do now? So what do you have to do now? If the blood spilled, you have to shech a new la Hashem, but you can't just shech a new seir la Hashem. What do you have to do? You have to bring a new pair. So if you have to bring a new pair, then what happens to the previous seir la azazel? It's left to die. That's what Rabbi Yehuda said before. Similarly, if the mishtaleach dies, let's say is a different kind of case. Let's say the blood didn't spill, but the seer that was supposed to go at la azazel dies. Then what do you have to do? You have to go ahead and do a new lottery, 2 new goats. Therefore, what do you do with the blood that you have in hand? You spill it out. So we'll say Rabbi Yehuda just seems to be repeating that which he said before. Meaning, once Rabbi Yehuda said that the leftover animal dies, then all he's doing is repeating that same concept in this second case as well. So the Gemara will ask why they need to repeat it. Okay, so says the Mishnah. Tanrabanan says the Gemara. Tanrabanan yikach shnei seirei izim miut. Miut seirei shnayim. Ma Talmud lomar shnei. So both say now we're going to go back now and focus a little bit on this idea. The Mishnah began with a concept, and the concept was that the 2 seerim, the 2 goats of Yom Kippur, must be exactly the same in every single regard. So says the Gemara. Now, where do we know that from? So also, what's interesting is the following. The Torah says Yikach Shnei Seirei Izim. So the Torah says on Yom Kippur you have to take 2 goats. So the Gemara says like this: Miut Seirei Shnayim. Now, both say, if the Torah wouldn't have said Shnei, right? But it just said Seirei. So Seirei at a minimum means what? 2. So Shnayim, Ma Tamalomar Shnei. So I'll say again, you could have expressed the same idea and left out the word Shnei. If you would have just said Yikach Seirei Izim, I would have said that an unqualified Seirei by definition means what? By definition means 2. So why do you have to go ahead and put in there Shnei as well? Oh, Sheyiyu Shneihen Shavin. So the Gemara says to teach us what? That the 2 have to be identical. So Shnei is not here to teach us a numeric lesson, but Shnei is here to teach us a qualitative lesson. That the 2 animals should be identical to whatever degree possible. So the Gemara says, Minayin afal pi she'ein Shnei and shavin ksherin. But how do we know that even though Shnei teaches me that they should be identical, but how do we know that even if they're not identical, what? The carbon is still good. Talmud lomar, seir. Therefore, the Torah goes out of its way to say seir twice, Riba. So we'll say the fact that it says se'ir twice indicates that what? That they could be independent and separate se'irim. So we'll say, so now listen to this drasha. So here's what we have. On one hand we have shnei to teach me what? That lemaisa again, they should be identical. They should be identical. And now, but again, lest you think that they're identicality. Is that a word? No, it is now. Okay, good. Their identicality is ma'akev, or their identical kite is right, is ma'akev. So again, therefore it says se'ir. And se'ir says no, they could both be individual. So l'chatchila, they should be identical. But b'diavad, even if they're not, the carbon is still good. So that's this. The Gemara says, Taima d'Rabbi Rachmana Hai. So we'll say, here's what's interesting. So the reason why I know that b'diavad, even if they're not identical, that the two se'irim are good is because the Torah goes out of its way to state se'ir. Ha lo Rabbi Rachmana hava amina psulin. Had the Torah not given me this ribui of se'ir, I would have said that if they're not identical, it's puzzle. So ikuva minalan. How do we know that it's makiv? And I will say, what the Gemara is asking is a very interesting question. What the Gemara is saying is ikuva minalan means just because the Torah says shnei could just mean lechatchila, which as we understand, the shnei means lechatchila, they should be identical. How do we know how? But here, so follow this train of thought for just a moment. So remember, we say it says shnei se'ireizim. I don't need shnei. Why don't I need shnei? Right? Because se'irei by definition means at least two. But Torah says shnei. What does shnei come to teach me? That they have to be identical. They have to be identical. How do we know that they have to be identical lechatchila? But b'diavad, if they're not, it still works. How do I know that? Se'ir. So the inference from the Gemara is, had it not said se'ir, so shnei would have meant they have to be identical, and what? And lemaisa, if you didn't, b'diavad, the cover wouldn't be good. So the Gemara says, how do you know that? How do you know that shnei, without se'ir, would actually mean that they have to be identical li'ikuva? They have to be identical, and if they wouldn't be identical, the entire avodah would be compromised. Sakadai Tchamina, I would have thought the following. Sakadai Tchamina, Shnei ksiv. Oh, because it doesn't just say Shnei once, says the Gemara. It says Shnei 3 times throughout the psukim of the Seirim. And therefore what? And therefore Lemais. So again, Shnei teaches me what? The Torah is coming along 3 times to impress upon us that the animals must be identical. So that's the Havamina. So I might have thought because it says Shnei, therefore the Havamina is that they have to be identical, and it's li'ikuva. Therefore, Kamash Malan what? Kamash Malan v'hashta the Rabbi Rachmana se'ir. Oh, sorry. So before we get to that, so we'll say that's the Havamina. The Havamina is not just that it says Shnei once; it says Shnei 3 times. I would have thought 3 times Shnei tells you they have to be identical. Therefore, what the Torah says, se'ir to teach me what the lechatchila should be identical. But b'diavad, even if they're not, it's okay. So the Gemara says like this. So now v'hashta the Rabbi Rachmana se'ir Shnei lamali. So we'll say. So now what's the pshat? So now it's like contradictory drushas. So you tell me Shnei teaches me what? That I would have thought the Havamina is that it's li'ikuva. They have to be identical. Se'ir comes to teach me what? That no, but the evidence, it's okay even if they're not identical. Okay. So now that I have se'ir teaches that they don't have to be identical, then what? Then what do I need Shnei for? So the Gemara says, I'll tell you. Chad lemare, v'chad lekoma, v'chad ledamim. So also remember now what Shnei teaches me. So now we have a tempered Shnei drasha. So Shnei is tempered by se'ir. So what does Shnei teach me? It teaches me that lechatchila, I would like the 2 goats to resemble each other. How? In 3 ways. In mare, in appearance, koma stature, damim value. So the Gemara says, Tiny Namiach, you have a brayso that supports this. Gabe kisve mitzora. Torah speaks of this by the sheep offering by the mitzora. What does the Torah say? Yikach shnei kivasim. So also the Torah says you will take 2 lambs. So now the Gemara asks, I don't understand the lashon. Miut kivasim shnayim. Ma talmud lomar shnei. So also same question as we had before. So remember, had the Torah just said kvasim unqualified, so kvasim unqualified would mean how many? Would mean 2. So then why do I need the word shnei? Sheyihiyu shneihen shavin. He comes to teach us what? That the 2 lambs of the Mitzorah should be identical. Uminayin afapi shein shneihen shavin kshirim. How do I know that even if they're not identical, the carbon is still good? Talmud lomar keves, riba. Oh, so the Torah says what? So also the Torah says keves, and what does keves teach me? That even if they're both individual kavasim, even if they don't look alike, the carbon is still good. Riba. So the Gemara says taima de Rabbi Rachmana. So the only reason why we know that bidi eved, the two sheep of the Mitzorah, even if they're not identical, are still good for Kabbanos, is because the Torah gave me the ribuy of keves. Ha lo Rabbi Rachmana, but had the Torah not said keves, hava amina psulin, I would have said that what? That if the animals are not identical, they're puzzle. So the Gemara says, Kuva minavan. How do we know that? How do we know that identicality would have been the ikuva by the kvasim of the Mitzorah? Sakadai tchamina tihi. Oh, because also why? Because the Torah says by Mitzorah. Look at Rashi for just a moment. Tihi. It's the first short line in Rashi. Rashi says Zos tihi Torah samitzorah. Demashma b'hav yosote parsha zu kichol akasuv ba. So we'll say what the Gemara is actually going to. The Torah says Zos tihi Torah samitzorah. So tihi, the Gemara understands to mean that the Mitzorah process must look like this, and you may not deviate. So I might have thought that the prohibition of deviating from the stated structure of Parshas Mitzorah would mean what? That the animals, the two lambs, two sheep, have to be identical, and if they're not identical, then what? Then Lamaisi would compromise the avoda. So the Gemara says, "V'hashta the Rabbi Rachmana keves tihiyeh lamali." So if that's the case, but once the Torah says keves, I must remember, what does keves teach me? Keves teaches me that the animals need not be identical b'diavad. So what does tihiyah teach me? To which the Gemara says, l'shar haviyaso shal Mitzorah. Oh, you know what it teaches me? It teaches me that for the rest of the processes of Mitzorah, you may not deviate at all. And if you deviate, you compromise the avodah. So the Gemara says, Tanan Nami Haki. Actually, it's interesting. In the Masoras Hashas, they change this to Tanya Nami Haki, or I should say Tanya Nami Gabe Mitzorah. We have another brisa that states this concept by Mitzorah. Ki Gavna, along with this same thing. Tziporim. So I will say the Torah speaks about the bird offerings of the Mitzorah. So what does Tziporim? Miut Tziporim Shnayim. So remember, again, I will say the pasuk says. The Torah says, "V'lakach lechate es habayis shtei tziporim." It's actually talking about tzaras habayis, tzaras in the home. You will take for the person two tziporim. So same kasha. Miut tziporim shnayim. I will say, what is tzipor? Unqualified tziporim means what? Means two. So ma tamud lomar shtei. Why do we have to say the word two? To which the Gemara says, "Shushdehan shavos." It teaches me that what? That the two birds should be identical. So the Gemara says, "Uminayin shafabi shein shavos ksheros." How do we know that even if the birds are not identical, the bird offering is still kosher? To which the Gemara says, "Talmud lomar tzipor riba." So we'll say same thing: seir, keves, tzipor. Torah comes along and says, no, even if they're not identical, the carbon is still good. Riba. So Gemara says, Taimid Rabbi Rachmana. So the only reason why, even if the birds are not identical, the carbon is kosher, is because the Torah went out of its way to say tzipor. Holo Rabbi Rachmana psulos. But the inference from that is, had the Torah not said tzipor, shtei would have taught me that the birds must be identical, and if they're not, the avodah is compromised. Where do we know that from? Ikuva minalon, sakadai tchamina tiyeksif. Oh, because I will say, what does it say by Mitzorah? It says by Mitzorah tia, zos tia Torah Mitzorah. And what does tia teach me? That it must be in this explicit order. Therefore, again, the birds must be identical. The Hashad Rabbi Rachmana tzipor. But now that the Torah gave me a riboy of tzipor, and tzipor teaches me what, Rabbi Sai? That even if the birds are not identical, the avodah is still good. So tihi alamali. So then what do I need tia for? What does tia teach me? The shar haviyaso shal Mitzorah. Oh, you know what it comes to teach me? It comes to teach me by other parts of the Mitzorah offering that they must follow the scriptural script, and if you go ahead and you deviate, you compromise the avodah. So I will say, now the Gemara, we have three different instances of this same concept. So we see it now by the Sirim of Yom Kippur, we see it by the Kevasim of Mitzorah, and we see it by the Tziporim of Mitzorah. In all of these cases, what you have is a lechatchila idea of having the two animals identical. Bidi Eved, you have a riboy in those psukim that teaches you Bidi Eved, that even if they're not identical, the avodah is still good. So Gemara says, Ihachi gabe tmi dinami. I will say, so why don't we say, let's apply this paradigm to the karbanos timidim? I will say the karbanos timidim are the daily sacrifices. And why don't you say the following? Yoma Nema kivasim. So we'll say, what does the Torah say? Torah says that you will take the kivasim b'nei shana, shnayim layom tamid. Right? So again, I will say, why don't you say the same thing over here? Remember, this is talking about now the Tamid Shal Shachar and the Tamid Shal Bein Arbaim, the morning offering, morning communal offering, the afternoon communal offering. So why don't they say the following? Kivasim, miut kivasim shnayim. I will say, remember, unqualified kivasim would mean at least two. Ma Talmud lomar shnayim. So why does the pasuk have to say that you have to bring 2 sheep, 2 lambs, for the purpose of your communal offerings? Shiu shnei and shavin. Maybe you should come to teach me that what? That the 2 animals have to be exactly identical. And how do I know that even if the animals are not identical, the carbon is still kosher? Talmud lomar, keves, keves, riba. Keves, keves, riba. Therefore, again, the Torah tells me that what? That lamaisa keves, keves means they don't have to be identical. So the Gemara says, Ula mitzvah hachanami deba'inan. Then I will say, the Gemara asks the kasha, but we know that by the Tamidin, by the Tamid Shal Shachar, Tamid Shal Bein Arbaim, there is no concept of what? There is no concept that they have to be identical. So the Gemara was just kind of saying, I can make the same drasha over here by the communal offerings, but yet I also know that what? That in fact is not an obligation of those karbanos. So therefore, what do I do with these drashas? I need this drashas, I need this shnayim, and keves for another reason. Shnayim layom, kineged hayom ata omer. So the Gemara says, Shnayim layom teaches me what? That they have to be literally opposite the day. Now, what does that mean? So ata omer kineged hayom, o eino ela chovas hayom. Maybe Shnayim layom means that there are 2 obligations per day. What do you mean kineged hayom? Kishu omer esakeves echad ta'asa baboker, ve'esakeves hasheni ta'asa ben harbaim, hari choves hayom omer. So both say when the Torah says you'll bring 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon, so that tells me my obligations of the day. Uma'ani mekayim shnayim layom. So what does it mean when it says you have to have 2 for the day? Kineged hayom. It has to be corresponding or opposite the day. Rabbi said, what does that mean? Tamid Shal Shachar. We'll have to stop over here for today because of time. But in Mir we'll pick up with this tomorrow. So we'll say where we're holding with this is the following. What we've established is in 3 different circumstances. The Shnei Seirim of Yom Kippur, the 2 Kivasim of Mitzorah, and the 2 Tziporim of Mitzorah all share a common theme, which is L'chatchila, they must be identical, but b'di'evet, even if they're not, it's okay. The problem now we've encountered is you can make the same drasha by the Karbanos Tamidin, by the daily communal offerings, but yet we know that by the daily communal offerings there is no obligation, even L'chatchila, to have them identical. If that's the case, what do we do with the verbiage of Shnayim by the Karbanos Tamid? We'll see that in Mir Hashem tomorrow.
How would we have assumed that she anyway? It's not the way.
I have 2 people singing. I didn't hear.
Why would we have assumed that when the pasuk says shnei, it's not the way?
Why would we assume that when it says Shnei?
We're saying it's a secondary drasha that says that the original shnei would have not been.
Right.
Why would it not be?